it's not just about eyeballs anymore. It's not just about slapping something onto TV and hoping that you're going to get a million eyeballs. It's now customers. Can I get your brand customers? We tend to have this outside look of, from a South African point of view, of what are the NBA doing, what is the NFL doing, what is the Premier League doing in the UK. Formula One's this global success story, but we do have really good success stories in South Africa, and we always tend to put a South African twist to these activations or events. So we're harsh on ourselves in that context.
Thank you so much for tuning in, and yes, welcome to the Care Report. It's Kobani Bobo, and today, more exciting things. Keeping it rugby is not just about the field only. It's about what makes that field operate and what gets us to be out there and about. The one person that I'm speaking about, the one giant, a young man who has done so much. Somehow he's got the ear of the whole country when it comes to sports, especially in the sports industry. Managing director, he left the post of managing director of Nelson Sports, taking up position where he became a director. Another MD of a South African agency, big T&W, talking about chasing the sun, 1, 2, all of that work, all the stuff that you see on TV. I met him doing some work, Varsity Cup with ASIM. I mean, this man has got so many things going for him. I can't even read his whole, his CV. It's stacked. Jean Villas, my guy, otherwise you well.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here and to chat about the business of sport, I guess. Because I'm not the athlete, so I'm not talking about what's happening on the field.
With the way that you look, I mean, you are the athlete, and what you have done in creating those opportunities for athletes. I mean, one of our content producers, when he first saw you, is like, I thought I was gonna see an Omia. I mean, it's been a career. I mean, you started very young. Take us through it. What's been that push?
Yeah, look, I got lucky as a lot of us did with Varsity Cup and Varsity Sport during the university days, and I think that really paved a platform for many people to get into the sports industry. And I think still to this day, the university sporting space is creating presenters and creating coaches and creating business people that want to work in the business of sport. That's where I started off, and then moved into the data world. Moved into the Nielsen world with a big global corporate in the Nielsen sporting space, and getting that data and insight into what's happening from a research point of view, which, from a backing point of view of, if you want to work in the sports industry, you got to understand the data, you got to understand the research. You can't just make stuff up. And so that really sort of gave me a good grounding in the sports industry, and then been dabbling in the creative space for the last 2 years with T&W, as you say. Only managed to put out the Chasing the Sun 2 documentary, so very privileged to be part of that. 2 Sides documentary, Comrades Marathon Down, which is a really cool production, and then a whole bunch of other campaigns and things for Super Sports and MultiChoice, which have been exciting to work on.
I mean, to talk about it in terms of business, the storytelling coming in from T&W. I mean, how important was that as a man who started the influence towards that, the data that was given from Nielsen, and talking about into the chasing his son's success in a certain way?
So it was really exciting. I mean, to take the data side of things, the research stuff, and be this kind of black and white box ticker, and then move into the creative world to really get a deep understanding from a creative point of view of what people resonate with, and trying to match those two, I think, is where you hit the sweet spot. If you understand the data and you are able to translate it into a really good story, then you really hit the nail on the head. It's that's where you want to be, and that's when you're going to resonate with customers. That's when you're going to resonate with fans and really get people ticking the box. And the Chasing the Sun story was an interesting one, because we had a challenge with Chasing the Sun where we didn't have all the funding from a multi-choice supersport point of view. We had to come up with a funding model, and built a funding model that got brands involved in that space as branded content.
Yeah.
And so, that really was an interesting model, interesting way of doing things, where it's not just slapping a logo onto something and hoping that a brand gets a return on investment, but working with brands from the start of that production all the way through to integrate their brand story and their narrative into essentially tapping into the Springbok story, which, I mean, is just a story by itself.
Oh, no,
phenomenal one.
It's an amazing tapestry. I mean, that the co-flowing and everything. Talking to about marrying the brands into the sport. What has been the sort of difference in the last decade, and how you sort of approach this sort of new, I guess it's new dawn, because I mean, after COVID, and then there's things that have sort of happened before that, and how people sort of consume now our sports entertainment.
Well, I guess if we go back to sports sponsorship and kind of the history of sports sponsorship, professional sport, starting in the 90s, sports sponsorship was essentially just a part of advertising and marketing, where it was, I want to put a logo on something and I want to tap into a passionate fan base. It was, quite simple. The more logos I put on something, hopefully fans see it, hopefully they recognize my brand, hopefully there's a bit of brand awareness in that. And as we've evolved over the last kind of 30 years, more and more data has become available, and more and more questions have been asked. There's no longer, I want to sponsor something because the CEO likes golf, or I want to sponsor something because I really like the Springboks. It's now, what does the data say? And without data, without that return on investment discussion now, the marketing teams and the CEOs, it's a lot more difficult to justify sponsorship. And so, this branded content space in the digital world is really where it's going. But it's because of what the data is saying. There's got to be you've got to tap into that passionate fan base in the sponsorship world, which you do have. It's not just a billboard on the side of the highway. So you do have a passionate fan base already. But you've got to make sure that the data is pointing in the right direction. You're getting a return on investment. It's actually creating awareness. It's driving sales. It's giving you customers. There's this whole discussion now around post-COVID that it's not just about eyeballs anymore. It's not just about slapping something onto TV and hoping that you can get a million eyeballs. It's now customers. Can I get your brand customers? Who are those people? Can we understand more about those people? So, this whole sponsorship game has evolved over the last 30 years, and, it's a fascinating space at the moment, and it's just getting more and more fascinating. But for me, the kind of key of it all is we've got to look at the data. We've got to understand, is this actually working for a brand? Otherwise, it's just slapping a logo onto something, and you might as well buy something on the side of the N1 and put a logo out there. Cheaper. Exactly, a lot cheaper.
I mean, let's talk about it. You talk about this branding of something. Just recently, America, massive sporting industry, the All Stars, the weekend that was, and the success or no success of that. How does that sort of space, because when we think America, we think big, right? We thinking, I was watching an F1, it was in London. I know it's not America, but it's in the UK, it's overseas, it's first world country. The F1 sort of launched the way that they done their thing. Taking that and then sort of comparing it to the South African unique space that we have. How does that sort of compare when you think, like, if you had to throw like an NBA All-Stars situation in South Africa, does that work? Because it is about the lay of the land, right?
Exactly, but I think we're very harsh on ourselves in South Africa. We have a Soweto derby that sells out every year, viewership numbers on that, attendance around that. Now with their new sponsor of the league, the activations around that match and this last Soweto derby was unbelievable. And so I think we are very critical of ourselves. When last did a Springbok test match not sell out? SA20 that just took place, every day for 30 days, almost all the matches were sold out, packed stadiums, passion for cricket is back there. So we tend to have this outside look of from a South African point of view of what are the NBA doing, what is the NFL doing, what is the Premier League doing in the UK. Formula One's this global success story, but we do have really good success stories in South Africa, and we always tend to put a South African twist to these activations or events, which is unbelievable for me. And so I'm very positive about the South African landscape, and I think that we're going through a transition phase at the moment in the industry where we're testing out and seeing what works, what doesn't work. Some of the smaller kind of traditional sports, I guess the hockeys of the world, the netballs of the world is growing, and they've got their own league now, and it's not just about rugby and cricket and football in this country anymore. That some of the other sports are coming up and taking sponsorship money, attracting fans. So we're harsh on ourselves in that context. We still have a lot to learn, I guess, in that space. And the fortunate thing that they do have, as you say, in America, is they've got millions and millions of people. You go have the Super Bowl on, and there's 120 million people watching it on TV. It's just
Americans,
unbelievable. So in that space, they do have the advantage that they do have a lot of people with a lot of disposable income. We've got a lot of other issues in South Africa which impact our sporting industry, and we don't always consider that. When we put on events, we don't always consider, if we're going to put on an event, don't put it on the 21st. Make sure it's after payday. Otherwise, don't expect people to arrive. So we've got to look at other economic issues in South Africa to solve stadium attendance and event attendance and tickets and merchandising and those things. But the fandom and the passionate for sport in this country is there. So it's just understanding the landscape a little bit better.
I mean, with that said, it just takes me to this scenario that exactly meeting corporate sort of space and how to sort of transition them to meeting their customers. But then for me, it's like, how do you then now take it to a situation where you're pushing both the customer and the corporate to sort of see the opportunity? Because that's probably what you have to mostly do most of the time.
So I think our rights holders in South Africa, if we talk about our federations and our teams, we a lot of the times arrive at brands wanting sponsorship, and it's basically like asking for a donation. It's not any form of return on investment. There's no real research that's gone into it. Why this brand? What is that brand passionate about? Who their customers? How's our event or our team or our league going to impact their brand? We usually tend to arrive at a brand going,
you make money.
We are a rugby team. Give us some money.
Yeah.
Why don't you want to give us money? And the brands start asking questions. The brands have got smart people working at these corporates, cool. And they start poking around and saying, cool, we would love to be a front of shirt sponsor or headline sponsor or naming rights sponsor of your team or your event, but what are you going to give for us? And so the rights holders in this country have got to do a lot more homework. They've got to understand their fan bases. They've got to understand the corporates' fan bases, because who are those people? Who are the corporates that are in South Africa, and who their customers, and what problem are you solving for them? It's easy when everyone's got a lot of money, but as soon as the economy starts, the screws start turning, then marketing budgets start being cut, and if you don't have answers to how marketing is going to actually give you more customers or supply you more fans in your database or any of that, then it's your budget's going to be cut. You're going to lose that sponsorship.
I mean, you probably, those varsity cup days, your varsity experience as someone who went and studied, were you the one who brought the black labels and the burgers for the varsity cup? Now, what I'm trying to get to is, once you understand the sort of who you're trying to give this to, how do you connect the right sort of sponsorship, the right people, to bring them to the right sort of customer, the ones that they'll really exploit this. This is what is needed. How do you go about that? I know you spoke about the data, but does your sort of interest in the both companies joining together to bring something that could be fruitful for both becomes the sole focus?
Yeah, look, I guess we've got to understand in this market that if we use the Varsity Cup example, they understand who the fans are that they've got. They understand it's a niche play, and they understand that it's not just about eyeballs and numbers and millions of views. Because if you're a sports team nowadays, you're not just competing against other sports teams. You're competing against general entertainment products out there. You're competing against podcasts. You're competing against everything from an entertainment point of view that's taking up some form of a fan or a customer's time.
Yeah.
And essentially, that's what you're fighting for now. We're all fighting for people's time. Do you have enough time to listen to this podcast? Do you have enough time to watch this 60-minute show? Do you have enough time to sit down on a Saturday and actually watch a live rugby match from start to finish? So we're fighting for time.
Yeah.
And we're not just fighting for time against other sports. We've got to understand that. So the more niche you can go in your customer base, the more you can understand them, the more you can unpack them. And that's, I guess, from a Varsity Cup point of view, what they've done really well is they've understood that market. They're not competing with Chiefs and Pirates.
Yeah.
They're not trying to put their product on SABC and get millions and millions of eyeballs. They have understood that they tap into that student database. They tap into passionate fans on a Monday night that want to come and watch a rugby game and want to have a party. And how can they find brands that want to tap into that student database?
Sure.
And that's essentially what you've got to connect. You've got to understand who's your fans, who are the fans that want to, let's use the Varsity Cup example.
Yeah.
Which brands want to tap into students?
Yes.
F&B, it's a no-brainer in that space.
Yeah.
They need to open bank accounts. They're going to have student loans. Soon they're going to buy cars. Soon they're going to buy houses. So if you that brand that is tapping into a space and an environment, even if it's a small niche environment like Varsity Cup.
Yeah.
It's not a national tournament. It's not something that every single person plays or even knows about.
Yeah.
But they've got a niche market. They understand that market and they're connecting it with the customer need from a brand. The brands need young students to be their customers. They've got a product that's going to give them that. And if they connect the two, then there we go. So it's not just giving millions and millions and millions of eyeballs and hoping for the best, because then we're competing against billboards on the side of the N1, because, then it's cheaper to get a billboard on the side of the N1 if you just want to put a logo there and say, here we are.
Yeah.
So if you are not going to understand that, and it goes all the way from Kaizer Chiefs and Pirates and Sundowns and the PSL, who have millions and millions of eyeballs on their games every single week in, week out, all the way through to Varsity Cup, all the way through to the schools environment. You've got a schools environment where on a Saturday there's 5,000 parents watching. They're passionate.
Audience.
Who are they? Where are they from? And so we've got to understand as rights holders. For me, it's the rights holders in this country have got a lot of work to do to understand who is actually our audience. Who are the 100 people or the 5 people or the 10 people? And if we know more about those 5 people, we can connect them to brands that want to invest in those 5 people. Because if you take 5 people and you sell them 5 cars, that's more valuable for a car manufacturer than putting a car manufacturer's logo and a million people watch it and it's cool. You're getting these hits and potential customers, but not one car sold. Then the 5 on the side of the rugby field at a, Kes school game is more important than, even some of the professional leagues.
I guess there must be misconceptions, and especially when it comes to these corporate deals and sponsorship deals. How would you sort of, demystify that and sort of like put it into clear perspective that what does that actually mean? Because we'll sit back and be like, how's the Lions sponsored by an airline? It's not SAA. I mean, there's those patriotic people. And then someone else will be like, Emirates, how can they come and they're taking money from us? And they don't see that. How do you sort of explain those sort of relationships when it comes to sponsorship, when it comes to the corporate sort of dealing with the brands and the teams that we have nowadays?
Yeah, there's always this patriotic thing that we want South African teams and South African leagues to be sponsored by South African companies. And you feel that South Africans have got this close, passionate fan base and they want to support South African. And similar, we saw a similar kind of outcry when all of a sudden the Springboks were going to be bought by an American company and South Africans all of a sudden going, we can't have the Americans buying us. It's not about the money. It wasn't about any of the other kind of deals on the table. It was all about this passion, kind of South African. We want to be South African.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, as South African teams, leagues, we've got to look at who's got the money. And unfortunately, from a South African point of view, we can't all be sponsored by South African companies.
Yeah.
And there are other companies around the world that want to tap into either the South African space, or they want to use our content and they want to tap into other markets. If we look at the SA20 League, for Betway as a naming rights partner, you've got a massive market in India that is busy watching cricket content. They love cricket content. And so as a betting brand, you want to sponsor something where there's global eyeballs. Yeah. You've got eyeballs in England, you've got eyeballs in Australia, you've got eyeballs in India, across Asia, not just in India, and Pakistan, Bangladesh, Afghanistan, big kind of markets with a lot of people that can be potential customers. So in that space, we've got to understand that an Emirates sponsoring the Lions,
it's huge.
Is not potentially doing it for me and you to buy more Emirates airline tickets, but the Lions are playing in the URC. There's a big UK market. The UK fans want to come to South Africa in the South African summer. Which airline are they going to use if they see the Lions are being sponsored by Emirates, and they're getting this constant every weekend, week out in the UK being bombarded with Emirates Lions, Emirates Lions, Emirates Lions. Sure, that's potentially an option for me when I want to go.
Yeah.
So global brands tapping into that in the South African context, I guess we've got to ensure that we are utilizing that and understanding that and making sure that we get the money from the global brands. It's not, we can't just rely on
what we have, right?
ABSA and F&B and Vodacom and MTN to sponsor the South African companies or the South African teams and leagues and events, because their marketing budget is in rands at the end of the day.
I mean, there's been a massive change when it comes to sponsorship, where value driven, the coexistent thing that makes us the brand and the customer sort of connect. How important, how far have we sort of exploited that within our space in South Africa?
We're getting there. We're slowly getting there in terms of understanding what value we can provide to a brand. And we are not just a place where we're going to slap a logo on the front of a rugby jersey and hope that brand is going to get some form of return on investment. We are understanding and unpacking what these brands want. What do they need? What are the problems that we can solve for them?
Yeah.
And I guess as rights holders, we've got to ask that question more. What are the problems we can solve? How can we solve a problem for an ABSA? How can we solve a problem for an F&B? What are those problems that they even have? Do they have problems? What is the problem for Vodacom? What is the problem for MTN? Before we approach them, or while we're working with them, we tend to very easily sign a 3-year sponsorship agreement and then play a couple of rounds of golf with the sponsorship manager and never talk about the deal. And then come renewal time, we increase it by 10% and hope that he signs again. Yeah. And we're very shocked when they don't sign.
It's like holding thumbs and hoping something happens without having understanding what was the value of the relationship. I mean, you talk about that. There's emerging sports that is coming. Esports is something that has come into the space as a competitive sport, because, like we were saying, I mean, we're competing with Netflix, we're competing podcasts, we're competing with anything that has to take away and take our time, and that's where we're going to give our time. How has this now sort of changed the viewership, and how can we exploit it?
So I guess there are two parts to this. There's the part that technology is here to stay, and that everything from a technology point of view, be it our cell phones that we tend to spend majority of our day on, we almost feel naked when we don't have a cell phone on us. It's like, what am I doing? From a cell phone point of view, and not just esports. If we break the whole gaming environment into it, what Discovery Vitality have done is they've turned exercise into a game.
True.
What Candy Crush has done is it's made 50-year-olds, 60-year-olds, 70-year-olds gamers, and so they are also involved in this whole space. And so very quickly when we look at that whole ecosystem, we tend to think that when somebody's a gamer, they're sitting in the basement somewhere, they don't have any friends, they're not communicating with anyone, and shame, they're not going to have a life. And then I guess we get esports, where it is people watching and supporting teams and individuals that are playing competitive gaming against each other.
Sure.
And so for me, the myth that we've got to crack in that space is that esports is almost like saying, oh, Gobani, you were a good sportsman and you played sport.
Yeah.
Not
That's it.
That's it.
Nothing else to give.
We're very in the traditional sense of sport. We're very good at going, he's a rugby player, he's a cricketer, he's a golfer, she's a swimmer, she's a netballer. But in the esports space, we still kind of, if we don't understand it, we just paint it with one brush and go, cool, it's a whole ecosystem that we don't really understand. It's far there, like Bitcoin and all those things that we don't like. So we're going to put it there in the basement and hope that it goes away. The rights holders around the world that are doing an unbelievable job at tapping into that market is understanding that it forms part of their ecosystem.
Yeah.
If we look at what the NBA have done in that space, they've created South African fans of the NBA by creating a really good game that South African kids are playing and becoming fans of individuals and teams in the UK, in the US. Yeah. And they are then buying their jerseys, going onto the app, consuming their content, waking up at 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning to watch the content live, and it goes back to this ecosystem of the game. So I think we need to understand it's not just something that's separate.
Yeah.
We as rights holders in this country, as SA Rugby in this country, as the SA cricket of the country, the PSL, we've got to understand, how do we tap into that younger audience by placing our brands, our positioning, our teams, our leagues in that environment where an 8-year-old, 9-year-old, 10-year-old can get exposed to it and can potentially be a future Kaizer Chiefs fan because they're using Kaizer Chiefs on
everything
in their games. They're playing with Kaizer Chiefs in FIFA, or they are, being exposed to something in the rugby world where, how do we tap into that? So we've got to see it as this big ecosystem where we want to get younger fans in and not see it as something that is separate.
Not for us.
It's not for us. It's there in the basement.
I want to buy the ticket, not buy the phone. Exactly. I want to see the print out, all the machinery stuff. I mean, there's one thing that I'm very passionate about. It's women's sport. The growth of women's sports has been amazing. Have we really started to tap into the potential that it has? Because I know it feels to me it's still at its infancy in the way that it's accepted by everyone. Where are we when it comes to women's sports? What is the opportunity when it comes to women's sports?
So globally, yes. Globally, there's this massive rise of, I guess, the individual women's sports, the football and the rugby of the world. Because if we think women's sport, we tend to think again of women's sport as something separate to men's sport.
Yeah.
Where if we think of tennis has always had, women playing, and Wimbledon, we've always watched the women's final on a Saturday and the men's final on a Sunday. We don't, and we watch Wimbledon.
Yes.
We don't ever say, are you
women's
watching
final? I'll watch Wimbledon final.
Women's men or the men, where are we in that space? If you look at Olympic sports, swimming of the world, women have always been there. So it's not to say that where is women's sport. I guess we then take it back into our sense of internalizing it from a traditional point of view and go, women's football in this country is not there, or women's rugby is not there, or our cricket team is not quite there, or they're not getting the funds. Where's netball in this world? Where, it's from a woman participating in sport point of view, your individual sports have been there and have constantly, we've watched them, we've engaged with them, we've supported them. There's money and sponsorship involved in that. The interesting part, I guess, is how do we then take this and overlay it into football, into rugby, into cricket?
Yeah.
And what we mustn't do in South Africa, and I guess even on a global scale, is we mustn't try and just duplicate what we've done. Now we've got 16 teams playing in the PSL, so we need 16 teams in the women's space.
Yeah.
We need the same format. We need the exact same thing. Why? We are trying to take this male dominant world and we're trying to impose it in the women's space and say, you must take part in this. This is how the FA Cup works, so you've got to do this.
Yeah.
Instead of creating something new, instead of, completely disrupting it and saying, maybe we can do a 4-team tournament in South Africa where we play 3 or 4 times in short tournaments, and then we grow
Festival
from there.
weekends.
Festival weekends, that sort of thing. I mean, if we look at sport in the women's space, and I know you're very passionate about this.
Sure.
We've got a massive amount of girls that are playing. I'm a father of 2 daughters.
Yeah.
They are playing sport 5 days a week.
Oh.
So they are constantly being exposed to sport at a schooling level. And then somewhere, something, we've got a massive drop off, I guess, in female sport participation in around 13, 14.
Yeah.
It is menstruation cycles start kicking in. Then we've got, 16, 17, 18 with clothing and sports bras. And so a lot of girls are going, it's not for me anymore because you guys are not addressing, you're not addressing my needs. You're not addressing my problems that I've got as a female and as a woman and as my body is developing. And so we tend to lose a lot of them. But the one thing that we're seeing in a massive resurgence now is that there are a massive amount of moms that are watching sport on the side of the fields, and they are passionate about rugby. They are passionate about cricket. They don't know who the Sharks are or the Bulls are.
I couldn't care.
But they know rugby.
Yeah, people are getting
They
involved.
are running on the side of the field at a school match, and they are passionate about sport. They are passionate about their kids, their sons and their daughters playing sport. And so, there's this, I guess, we tend to either superimpose women's sport on and say you've got to fit into the men's world.
Yeah.
And then we also don't take care of our young girls as they come through the system, as their needs evolve, as they grow and as they develop. We don't nurture that space from 13 to 18 to ensure that we've got sports fans. Because essentially at the end of the day, if we can get young girls to keep playing sport for a longer period of time, we'll have a bigger fan base.
So
it's
true.
not just about having the next Tatiana winning an Olympic medal or having Banyana winning AFCON.
The World Cup, the AFCON.
It's really around, can we create sports fans? Can we have people listening to this podcast because they're interested in sport and they happen to be women?
Yes.
So that, I guess, we've got to understand, and we're not there. We're definitely not there. There's a lot of work that has to be done by rights holders. There's a lot of work that has to be done by federations to have these conversations and unpack it and not just say, this is how we've always done it. This is how we're going to continue doing it.
I mean, Joan, we can go on. For me, what is the next big commercial opportunity that is out there that we sort of like in sports, sometimes because you are inside the industry, you got blinkers because you're either sort of focusing only on the one sort of side of things. What is the next big opportunity when it comes to the sports roles, the sports business in South Africa?
So I guess I have to be biased and answer school sports in that space and seeing that I'm very, very close to the Super Sports Schools product and that environment and the growth that I've seen over the last couple of years in that school sporting space. I'm going to be biased in that space and say there's going to be massive growth of school sport in this country. And school sports is essentially, if we don't have school sport, we don't have the next
sport.
Olympians, we don't have the next Rugby World Cup, the Cricket World Cup. Our school system in South Africa is essentially our club system or our development system. And so with a strong school system in this country, if we keep going, we'll continue to win World Cups and win Olympic medals. And so for me, the school space is something really interesting to look at. And then I think a lot of the leagues and federations in this country are currently internalizing the product offering that they've got. And I think we've seen the change with the Betway SA20, where now we've got a cricket league that is revitalized the energy within cricket. All of a sudden, we've got young boys and girls asking their parents, can we maybe go to Wanderers on Thursday night or on Saturday morning to go and watch a bit of cricket, which we haven't had for the last couple of years. So I think there's a lot of the rights holders in this country that are going to be doing a lot of is this product that we're putting out there, is the league that we're taking part in still the best league for our customers? And so I think we're going to see a couple of changes in that landscape. And then the free-to-air broadcast space, SABC has been the sleeping giant for many years. And I think that, now with the partnership where we've got Super Sports Schools on SABC Plus, it is a channel there. We've got South Africans being exposed to school sports, live school sports.
I mean, it's
Monday to Sunday.
It's literally you tracking what's coming up, because the one thing that I think encourages the grassroots, that encourages the school sports being the bedrock of the big sort of the sports at the end, is the fact that we can track them, we get to know them, we get introduced to these youngsters at an I mean, there's nothing more of an exciting story when you sit back and you watch a LeBron James when he was 15 and there's footages of him till now playing 20 seasons in the NBA. And then to take it to South Africa, you think of watching and seeing a player playing at school and then growing with them. I mean, I think it is a commendable space that you guys are sort of tapping into. How does SABC Plus or digital sort of work, and how is school sports, super sports, school sports have taken and embraced that, and how do you want to bring it to the people?
Look, I guess in South Africa, from a sporting point of view, if we want to, we've got this, I guess, light that we always tend to use and say everyone wants to be like Sia and they want to, be the Sia of the world. Why do we have that? And
I want to be the Jean, by the way. Disclaimer.
And so for me, it's a thing of exposure.
Yeah.
So if we are going to have a young kid that grows up in a township and he has no access to any TV or any footage or any content, he doesn't know who Gobani is. He doesn't know who Sia is.
True.
He doesn't have any heroes or role models to look up to. And so the more we can ensure that when a kid turns on a TV channel or turns on some form of content and he gets to experience and be exposed to it, we're creating heroes where we can essentially say, I want to be like that and I can create a better life for myself because I want to grow out of that. So, not everyone can go to a stadium. Not everyone can watch sport live. Not everyone plays sport at school. So, going back to the girls' sport, if we don't have girls participating in sports, similar to boys. If we don't have boys, there are plenty of schools in this country that don't have sport. So if we don't participate in sport, if we don't watch sport live, and we don't see it on TV, how are we going to ever have sporting fans? How are we going to ever have the next whoever is going to come through as either a professional sports fan or just as a regular guy who wants to be a fan of rugby and cricket and football and golf and netball in this country?
Yeah.
And so long story to come back to, I guess, the SABC Plus relationship and the work that Supersport and SABC are starting to do is starting to realize that if we expand this reach and we give more people access to it, Supersport Schools is already a free-to-air platform.
Yeah.
It's got over 1 million registered users now. Now you tap into SABC Plus, who's got just under 800,000 registered users.
Sure.
Now you're getting to the 2 million mark. You keep growing that platform. You start putting matches on different platforms and on different free-to-air channels and content out there, and you're tapping into the 4 million Facebook followers that SABC have, and you're putting content out there. You're growing that pie. You're ensuring that more and more kids are going, sure, I want to run that athletics meeting. I want to be like a Carney. I want to be like that person because I see him in that space, and maybe I've got a talent. Maybe somebody can see me, and I can get picked up into that environment. So that's the big thing from a Supersport Schools point of view. Yes, it's there to ensure that we are covering school sports.
Yeah.
There's a commercial model built around it, but it's really much to say, can we unlock that? Can we find the new sport fans? Can we find the 10 or 20 people that potentially want to be professional sportsmen?
Oh man, this is amazing, because I mean, when you sit back and you sort of reflect and how we've all become these sports fanatics, getting to touch, getting to see them, getting to make it more personal. I mean, there's so much. I mean, what is your most memorable project that you guys have done? Something that made it special. What has been that thing for you that when you sit back and you think to yourself, I have to pinch myself, I actually was part of this and I saw it from when it was starting and to seeing the big picture? Because, I mean, understanding your mindset, you work from information, implementing it, and how do you want to implement it? How do you plan and focus around it? What has been that most memorable sort of projects that you've been sort of involved in? I mean, there's been a lot. You've been in the block.
Look, I guess it's in the creative world.
Yes,
has to be by far hands down having the absolute privilege to be part of that team to bring Chasing the Sun to alive. Being involved in understanding those stories, sitting in those interviews where players are being interviewed for 2 or 3 or 4 hours and listening to their stories, many stories didn't make the actual documentary, but being able to sit and listen and absorb and take in some of the kind of real world stories that came out of that, that was phenomenal and definitely a highlight of my career. The other one has got to be the fact that I had the privilege in 2018, 2019 to attend the first birth meeting of Supersport schools. And essentially where that product has gone, I left that whole ecosystem and environment. I worked in research and in the creative space, and now I've gone full circle back into the Supersport schools world, and having the privilege to be at that very first meeting, and then now see where it's come with the amount of eyeballs and people that are watching it, and consumers that are like just excited about schools athletics and schools swimming. Those are two projects definitely for me that stand out head and shoulders above the rest.
John, just to sort of trying to wrap it up, what's your next big project? What's your ambitions in this quite recent future? I guess the new horizon. What is it that's keeping you now, kind of getting excited still about this role and this space that you're in?
So we've got a very, very cool documentary project that we're busy working on at the moment, and with our good friend Lungani Zama.
Oh, what a writer, man with a pen. When are we getting you here?
We've got a very cool project that we're about to launch into the market, and it's really untapping the stories that haven't been told.
Sure.
And I think in the South African landscape, there's a lot of stories that people think that Sia Khaleesi was our first black rugby player, for example. There are a lot of people in Bryanston, Sia, he's our hero.
He's the first one. It took him 20 years.
We had many athletes in South Africa that didn't ever get their stories weren't ever told, from the early 90s, from the 60s and the 70s, and there's golfers and rugby players and footballers that have come through the system. Their stories have never been told. So let's see where we can take that, and hopefully we can launch that in the not too distant future.
Jean, please don't be a stranger. It's always a pleasure, because I feel every time I meet you, I'm always learning, always growing, which is a good thing. Which is a good thing, because I value your friendship and I value your insight that you've given us, the stuff that you guys are putting it out there. And it's good to see South Africans being this passionate about South Africans and having a different perspective of how we view ourselves as sports industry in South Africa. I thank you so much for your time.
Thanks very much for having me.
Please subscribe and follow and get yourself out there and about. Support the sports, because without you fans, this game is nowhere without you. Thank you so much for watching.